is Kenneth. My pronouns are he and him, and I'm the curator and host of this here reading series, Poetry at the Point, through the St. Louis Poetry Center. I'm really glad you're here, as I hope to remember to say every time. I don't take for granted the fact that people leave their houses to come see a poetry reading in person in the year 2024, so thank you for being here. I am going to go through a few of the usual announcements, but before I do, I have found it really fun just to kick us off with a poem. So will you indulge me in that luxury? Hi, welcome, come in. Was that a yes?
Yeah.
Okay, consent is important. So I wanted to kind of try to exercise an essay writing muscle a little bit more this year, and I was telling folks about it, and Lizzie said, oh, you should check out this magazine called The New Territory, which is devoted to the lower Midwest. I guess we are part of the lower Midwest. But anyway, it's a beautiful magazine, strongly recommend it. It turns out I actually know some people on the board who are also fantastic humans, fantastic writers. And in this particular current issue, there's a poem that I'm going to read to you that is my favorite kind of poem, which is it kind of lands in this sweet spot of just incredibly weird and incredibly heartbreaking and incredibly eco-poetical, which is what I'm mildly obsessed with right now. So this is by a writer named Arita Ryder, and the title is In Which My Son and I Witness a Procession of Beetles Crawling Between the Mazda and Mailbox. Dress your body in sackcloth, your scalp in ashes. Baptize the earwig in a petri dish. Wrap its thorax in paper and twine. To the housefly, give bread and honey. Behold its silver eggs. Permit your lips to quiver and keep a sugar cube on the doormat. Anoint with oil the belly of a snail and bid farewell to mason jars and rolled up newspapers. Soak in rose water the abrasions of all bugs. Go forth, my child, and banish the bicycles of the world to little huts on the coast of Antarctica. So, announcements, as usual. Thank you to our members. You can become a member today, this very evening, if you'd like. I assume and hope that Eileen is putting this fancy banner up on the video that tells you how to do that, where on the interwebs you can do that. You can visit us in yonder corner before you leave to take care of that. It's easy breezy. Please do it. Help support all of our wonderful programming and otherwise. Always shouts out to the Missouri Arts Council and Regional Arts Commission, and always a big shout out to the Focal Point, beautiful space that you are sitting in right now. I have more than the usual events to announce, and I'm really, really pumped about that. First of all, we have an observable reading, our sister reading series. It's 7 o'clock at the High Low on April 6th with Edgar Kuntz and Reyes Ramirez. Followed the next day, correct me if I'm wrong, with the Sunday workshop. With those same two folks at 11:30, also at the High Low. So check that out on our website. Please sign up. Please come. It's going to be fantastic. We also are in conjunction with Poetry in the Woods and the Novel Neighbor, putting together a spring forward reading, kind of led by Poetry in the Woods, on April 8th. That's at 4 p.m. Poets, is it Amy Whittemore? Am I pronouncing that correctly? Great. And Travis Basati are presenting a craft talk, a literary meet and greet, and poetry reading and conversation. I did that with my hands because it's actually 3 separate things that you can kind of sign up for a la carte effectively. Definitely check that out. And last but not least, I had a friend poet email me who has sort of spawned this Babbler Poetry Society. So some people in this room are actually part of it. And some of them are reading at 3 p.m. at Chimera Teas in the Grove-ish on April 13th. So definitely check that out too. So housekeeping, if you're here in person, restrooms, if you go out this door and make a left, you will see some work being done, okay? So disregard signs. It's all gender inclusive. It's all good, all right? Just be mindful of your surroundings. Things might be damp. Things might be half assembled. Just be mindful, okay? Yes, last thing I was going to say, if you're watching on the internet, hello. I'm glad that you were here too on Facebook or YouTube or elsewhere. If you're watching this after, today's the 26th, right? I always forget what date it is. In the future. I'm glad you're watching it. Please comment. Please keep commenting. we're going to have some conversations with these poets afterwards. So you here at the focal point and online, as questions come up in your brain or things you want to talk about with those poets, jot it down, keep it in the back of your mind because we want to engage with you in conversation with those poets at the end. So I've talked a lot, and I'm now going to begin the end of my talking by introducing Macallan Lay, a poet from St. Louis, Missouri. She is currently pursuing her MFA at the University of Missouri. Her work has been featured in Vagabond City, Flat Ink, Lit Mag, and Bad Jacket. She didn't want me to say this, but she's also a project manager. And I think that's really cool and not lame at all. Please, Macallan.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna get situated, so ignore me for 5 seconds. Or don't, obviously, since nobody's saying anything or talking amongst themselves. How we doing?
Great.
Good. Okay, cool. I love that. Thanks for not just looking at me like I'm insane when I ask you a question. All right. Hi to all of you. How's that?
Beautiful.
Thank you. Awesome. I just want to start out by saying thank you. I have a lot of people to thank, so we'll try to keep it short. Thank you to the St. Louis Poetry Center. I want to thank Kenneth, Aaron, and Bailey. And thank you to everyone who is here. Like you were alluding to, it's 7:30 on a Tuesday. I would usually be like finishing dinner with my wife and turning on another episode of Survivor right now. So I really appreciate you showing up and showing out for this. So a little bit of context for you about my project at UMSL and how that's sort of evolved. It's taken on really just a lot of different shapes and forms as it's kind of come to life, but largely we're looking at poems that are wrestling with memory. Some of them are driven by narratives. They are concerned with family lineage and addiction and how family lineage is intertwined with that sometimes. And they're also concerned with addiction at a young age. I got sober when I was 19 years old. If you are 19, I consider you to be an adult by law, but also kind of a child still. So it was something that dramatically altered the course of my life. And so appropriately, this is titled Self-Portrait at 19. I longed for release the way violence longs for a direct target. I spoke in manifestations, uncurled my tongue and cut others with it like a knife. From full carafes, I poured the finest golden liquid and still wanted. Because I desired any body outside my body, I slipped into the cold, barefoot, and uncontrollable. Nothing could just be. When the sun crusted over the valley, I watched, I waited. And because I loved a good storm, I stomped my feet and summoned thunder. So, do you guys remember the Titan submersible? I don't find that my poems are often concerned with current events necessarily, but when this happened last summer, I was very enthralled by it. So this is called Limited Oxygen. Off the coast of Newfoundland, a submersible goes missing, wrapped in jet black blue pressure and boundless space. For days, the Coast Guard combs the water, pulling her abyss back like a curtain blocking the light. A countdown starts online, signaling the impending loss of breathable air. I admit I struggle to find empathy. A woman on TikTok explains the ethics behind why human beings are biologically wired to feel nothing during a time like this. The evening shuts its clam. We resist beating the soft body. Unable to sleep, I read. My psyche's clock ticks silently in the background. A news article says the 19-year-old son on board didn't want to go in the first place, highlighting his terror, his fear. Once upon a life, I let a bottle talk me into a nightmare. The difference is it was recurring. Officials speculate the implosion happened so fast, the passengers didn't even know what was coming. A truth I can taste, like salt water. Nature stalls the child in each of us, flips our green curiosities onto their heads, but I wasn't really a child back then. No time to panic, painless. Amongst all ordinary, the weapon of my mind folds. The hatch clicks shut. So often we wish to rid ourselves of that which we cannot unsee. We wager our faith on a version of us we can't find the heart to be. Thank you. Okay. This next one is an anaphora. So there's a lot of repetition driving the flow of the poem. And it's called Birdsong. Grace for the window flown into midday. Grace for the glittering grass, the daisy-dusted patch that broke your fall. Grace dropped down upon the dumbstruck, the speechless, the consistently astonished. The screen door hinges squeak grace. Grace for the cream-colored plumage covering your portable body. Labored breathing, grace. Grace for the family that once pushed you out of some distant nest. Grace if they grieve. Grace if those left behind pluck their feathers only to watch them fall. Grace for the look passed between our eyes when we both know what this has come to. For split-second decisions, for twisted bones, grace. Grace make way for the yellow rubber gloves and Reebok shoebox, the makeshift coffin for burial. Grace because there are some things in life better off broken. Even with blood on my hands, I am trying to make this beautiful. So, I find that if you do something like get sober, you start to learn more things about yourself slowly over time that maybe you would have realized before had you been paying attention. This is the course of life, you know. And one of the things that I realized about myself when I decided to get sober was that I was gay, and that I had been running from that for a very long time. The signs were all there. This is called control. Impressively, I was afraid of everything. Spiders suspended by fine diaphanous webbing down the dank walls of my apartment. Dust bunnies in corners of the basement that turned out to be just dust bunnies. The 200,000th mile on a car, the inevitable end to a song, being controlled, being wrong. I was afraid of petals falling from flowers that once thrived, the end of winter bridging the beginning of spring, the expectation to exhume myself from the hibernal ground that buried me. I was afraid of dropping things, the ball, expensive china, sharp knives, shards of delicate glass splintering the crevices of my hands, a spontaneous house fire, climate change, men, no offense, a loaded gun pointed at my forehead. I was afraid of dark liquors, white powders spread across mahogany coffee tables. I was afraid of chemicals, my body and my brain, the girls who were pretty in a violent sort of way, the kind who stretch a hand out to you that says, I'll consume you. I mean, come to bed. I'm gonna read a poem that's not mine, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think you can learn a lot about people by hearing what some of their favorite poems are. And it's really hard to pick a favorite, so I'm not gonna sit there and say this is my favorite ever, but it's up there. And this is from this collection called I Do Everything I'm Told by Megan Fernandez. And I just think she's really cool, so this is Drive. I walk into a record store on Christmas Eve and the cars are playing, so of course I think of you. In therapy, I learn words and box 3 days a week and read Russell Brand's book about being fucked and for months cut out drinking and apply to divinity school and examine my life and the impossibility of you and how I is a mirror and you is nothing but a projection of I, and I did try, honestly. I recited cliches when language failed and let my self-helping heart run ravenous at a buffet of cheap routines, and then came armed one day with my ancestors who had lived through revolutions and ships raging at their shores, and they too shrugged at me. So I blamed my sexuality and childhood and made every target an easy one just to make it make sense, but it wouldn't fit. Nothing fit. And my friends said words about history and power, and I wanted the pain to be ideological, but it was too easy. And nobody admits that ideology can envelope almost anything and therefore is bad form. I gave up. It was an angelic state, a surrender to a belief that you and I was a unity that could return one home if home were a pair of blue stars in devoted orbit, seen as one bright pulse from Earth, away from the brute facts of living. But home is not two suns. There is no home and nothing to return to, just a series of shadows, partial signs of presence, a flickering. I say things and then unsay them. It was love. It was not love. It is raining. It is not raining. Contradictions are a sign we are from God. We fall. We don't always get to ask why. Those last lines are really, all right. This next one, I'm gonna preface with a little more context. My father has become a large character in my project, more so than I would have ever suspected, and he would probably love to hear that. I don't know that he knows how to pull this video up, but if he ever finds it, you're a big part of this. When I started writing these poems, I was coming from a place of anger. And one of my professors, Shane Seeley, tells me that anger doesn't make for very interesting poetry, which is probably true. But I found that writing through the anger led me to softness that I hadn't really anticipated. So that's what I'll say about that. I'll also let you know that some context for this. I didn't learn to pump gas until I was 19 years old, despite having a driver's license. And that's just like embarrassing and not something to be proud of. But a poem was born out of it, so here we are. This is called Reaching. Whenever we fought, my mother would say, "You two are so alike, you're different." As soon as I turned 16, I got my driver's license. I even had a car, nothing fancy. A simple luxury taken for granted, the glowing allure of freedom on the other side of the dashboard. For most of my life, I have been afraid of my father being indifferent about me. But every Sunday, he climbed into the front seat of my hand-me-down Hyundai, his right hand holding the sun-bleached steering wheel, a lit cigarette in the other, like a middle finger raised to the wind. Let me tell you another story in the middle of this one. My dad was 16 in 1970, grew up in rural Tennessee. That year, the constant threat of his older brother being drafted, the Vietnam War whispering its bluffs in the background, his favorite musicians dropping like warnings, First, Jimi Hendrix. 16 days later, Janis Joplin. That summer, my dad and his buddies got drunk and put a Porsche engine inside a Volkswagen Beetle, slammed on the gas, and soared down the open road just to crash it. Here in the car, I see him the way he is, the reigning king of causing trouble, hand lightly trembling against the sun-bleached steering wheel, his lanky figure in the driver's seat, turning the key in the ignition, coasting towards quiet highway amidst the cicadas' song. My father is a stubborn man who won't let his daughter pump her own gas until she has to. My whole life, he has loved me the way you would love a son, from a distance. I'm gonna wrap up here. So this is the last one I'll do. And when I was putting these together, what I wanted was to make sure that I left off on a hopeful note, because I don't think the subject matter of addiction or family trauma and is hopeful sometimes. So it's important to me that I ended on that. This is called Not to Be Denied. I rarely own up to it anymore, how much I admire the horses, their deep chests and shiny coats, legs like tree limbs, heavy hooves and hearts, how the point of their hips bulge and retract as they race for the finish line. When I was young, my dad dropped me off at riding lessons, pulled away in the Ford as soon as I saddled up, and clicked my heels into the sides of whichever great beast I bestowed my trust in that day. I always chose a horse by its name, still do. Today there is Scarlet City, Trouble Finds Me, and Ashley too. One summer morning, the horse I rode decided she was fed up with me, ignored the knocking of my boots against her belly. An Appaloosa with a bad attitude. She took off through a remote trail, galloping uphill while I closed my eyes, tried hanging on to her backside. Hours later, I found my way back horse in tow. After the incident, I came early to each lesson, stood at her stall armed with a peace offering. Sugar cubes, apples, and carrots. Peach slices if I was feeling generous. She smacked her lips against my fingers and appreciated what little I had, was willing to bet on me so long as I was on her. I think we both longed for the same things, really. An open hand offering a little sweetness, to be cherished even when difficult. For someone to hear our names and confidently say, her, yes, that one. My money is on her. Thank you.
Thank you. You didn't have to end on hopefulness, but I appreciate the gesture. All right. I'm realizing, I was nervous. This is a good crowd, and there's people here I didn't expect, and I didn't even say, who was reading tonight? That was Macallan Lay. Yeah. Anyway, I'm excited about both of these poets. Our second poet is Bailey Schaumburg, a poet and a writer who lives in St. Louis, Missouri with their cat, Calypso, and their dog, Stanley. Got some Calypso and Stanley fans in the house tonight. They are almost as much about finding and engaging in poetry community as they are about poetry itself. They currently serve as a co-curator for the Observable Reading Series, which I mentioned earlier, through the St. Louis Poetry Center. Poetry is their first love and will undoubtedly be their last. Bailey, please. The shoes weren't drawn.
Well, I think you're gonna take them off, to be honest, like a drunk girl in the club, which I've never been, ever. Kenneth so much. Thank you, Poetry Center. I love you. Yeah, I have fun around with this too. Okay. Can we hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Macallan, thank you. I'm so glad we're reading together. Really, it makes me feel safe and amazing. And wow, like your faces, it's really special for real. Thank you for being here. Love you, Dana. Love you, Dana. Fucking Karen's here, you guys. You don't know Karen, but I know Karen, and I didn't know Karen was gonna be here, and I got really emotional. I cry all the time, which most of you know about me. My mom's here, which I'm glad about. That little back row back there. They pulled me out of the muck, man. And Colin, I think you should air horn at least once. So, don't tell me when. I almost brought. Also, thank you, Lizzie. I just love you. You're great, and I love being a curator with you. Okay, now I'm gonna shut the fuck up. Well, I'm not, but I'll move on. Okay, so I was going through some poems, and I found this page that had someone's revisions on them, and I tried to turn it into a poem to read to you, but I couldn't make it work. But this is, I guess, an intro to my poetry, maybe. It said, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. I don't understand. What is going on? I think this might be stupid. Question mark, question mark. And it cracked me up. Unfortunately, not enough there to make a really viable poem. So I need to try again. All right. I'm going to read some real old poems, and I'm going to read some real new ones. All right. Night Idol. Sizzling and protective flesh for so long. The nipples we all thought once about cutting off. We'd like to know how to live in these bodies. How it is we can stand to live in these bodies. It's the longest night of the year, and everybody has a fever. The fingers and ears of our insides yanking. Okay. So I love symbolism. I'm a nerd about it. This is really, I'm so sorry. I kind of just want to like scream. So I've gotten the opportunity to work with a lot of kids, which is amazing. I do have favorites. Anybody who works with kids and says they don't is a fucking liar. And one I watch now, and I just adore her. And she asks me all the time, what does your house look like? And she wants me to go through every detail. When you walk in the door, when you go down the hall, what does your bedroom look like? And in my head, it's like she's asking, who are you really? What choices do you make? The house. I style my mansion in 4s. Drip my walls by the hundreds in cocoa-dipped cotton. Never have I seen a home divide so surely. I have never seen such a demise. When I walk through the halls, I bite my tongue berry. Red is the color of my inquiry. The man at the end crooks his finger to a hook. I follow the claw to its point. If my dad's watching, hi. My sisters are watching, hi. I have a niece on the way. It's our first nibbling baby. And last I knew, she was the size of an iceberg lettuce, and she kicks a lot. So this poem is dedicated to her. Luxury. The daffodils are scrawny people waving at my pain. A luxury to feel the pain. I suck at this mic, y'all. I'm so fucking sorry. Dug down into the mouths of birds, their songs can choke the pain. I'll never be Parisian. I'll never have a plan. I'll never eat a sauteed heart. I'll never grow a yam. I'll never have a nice big perm. I'll never ride the wave. I'm a two-toned vial of strange fire. Please let me hold your hand. And I do believe that pain is a luxury. We're afraid of it, but I don't think we should be. And then it's funny, the next little note I have for myself just says, breakups suck and then they're awesome. So this is called the No-No Room. It's about as confessional, I think, as my poetry gets. Yeah, the No-No Room. In the no-no room, our soft chords belittled. The room we papered in wrath. In this case, wrath is 1,000 wee lilacs, identical, uniform, trapped. A metaphor maybe of a weaker, lesser love, of a baby never had, of a guzzled pint too many, of a boy's trip to Vegas, of your hateful mother's hate, of me, of stop calling me a whore, of a too-creased fitted sheet, of has that onion been rotting in the fridge all year, of the house is burning, of you are burning, of I am burning, of what burns in me burns in you, of honey, did you bake that sweetest lemon cake, of good job, honey, of don't condescend, of quinoa in the cabinet, of take me to the gravesite, of that donkey is neglected, of can I be its friend, of you are a dumbass, of but don't you get the joke, of don't condescend, of your spine's earthen smell, of don't condescend, of how this is the end, of our waxy floral galaxy, of you are wilting, of I am the emptiest field. I think that, Macallan, what you said about anger is very on point of how anger can move into softness. And this is a poem about something I hate. Dinner party. Me hosting specifically. I'll come to your dinner party all fucking day long. I'll come, I'll enjoy it, I'll drink sparkling water, I'll fucking leave shit around, you know, it'll be great. I don't want to host a dinner party. Okay. A ceremony of softness. Softer than organs, softer than oranges, softer than lamb. And when I present my palms, dented goblets of peace, to offer parcels of food to my guests, I want to scream and die. It's like they take lessons in gobbling peace, their globular heads growing larger by the sec, how they wait for my stockpile of delicate sugar. My potatoes need my water, that's for you, Andrea. My dishes need my dishes, my piss needs my piss, my eyelids need their freedom, and that oblong, fucked up knitted blanket won't dare knit itself. All right, we're getting there. Just a few more. You know what? I'm gonna skip this one. I'm gonna read it. Hold on. Okay. Getting there. Eventually. Okay, all right. Body idol. Crickets don't draw self-portraits. They click sound through the air to arrest me. Their one job, or so I think, as I sketch my nose atop my nose, the only way I've found to really get it right. One more body idol, and then a poem that, I mean, you know, it's weird. It's also kind of animal based, and it's also hopeful. So, body idol. The grocery store is raw fear, and here I am not my poem, but an eggplant, the deepest and most loved purple. My little green cap tilts, do a dance, remove my pants. My appetite is a clunky newborn thing, and I wonder, toothpaste, tea tree, the cashier in aisle 3. I'm so hungry I'll forget I love anything. I'm so hungry I'll eat the whole white cake. So, you know, I was kind of brought, I really feel brought out of a really, really dangerous, bad place in the past year. And a lot of people who showed up and did that for me and with me are in this room. And you know who you are, and I'm fucking grateful, really. The one person who's not here, who's helped save me, is Stanley, my dog. I love Calypso, my cat. She's like a part of me. She would like drown in the sorrow with me, you know. Stanley's like, we gotta move it. Yeah, I was agoraphobic, and I was afraid that I couldn't take care of my dog. This one's called, and this will be the last one. Ezra Pound says, technique is the test of sincerity. I say, take a look at leaves on trees, wild fox, orange, 3rd week, 10th month, guard cells, surrounding, stomata, the dog, lacunas, light flares, leaking, speckling, the face, sweet dog, my dog, big dog. He walks me out, he walks me home. Thank you.
Now's the awkward transition time. Anybody got a joke?
Oh, I'll tell one.
Go ahead.
The other night at dinner, I told my mom that I was gonna dye my hair orange again, and she said, "Orange? You afraid it's gonna fall out?" And honestly, I was a little, but it didn't. So there's my joke.
That's great. That was really good. Thank you for that. Thank you for filling the time perfectly. I really am grateful to you. I don't even know where to start. That was really, really lovely poetry from both of you. Thank you so much. I feel, yes. I feel honored to get to facilitate these often, and tonight is one of those. So I want to start by asking each of you to kind of talk about how you came to poetry initially, both as a reader and as a writer. because and we don't do this often in anticipation of these readings, but I've known both of these folks before, so I was like, why don't we get together and have coffee and talk about what we're going to talk about? And they both said that they, well, I'm not going to speak for you, that the process of engaging with poetry, whether as a reader or as a writer, was a way to foster healing. And I like to knock on the door of kind of that conversation a little bit, but I always fail. So I'm going to ask you to use your own words to talk about that. Anybody want to start?
Sure.
Go for it.
So the question is, how did you come to be a reader and a writer of poetry?
And how do you engage with poetry as a way to foster healing?
Okay. Well, I think that I was a writer of poetry from the day I was born. I don't think that I probably wrote poetry or started to learn how to write poetry until I started to read poetry. I think the poetry was always in me. I think it just didn't really happen for me until I started to read it. And I just found a poem one day. I found a book of poems one day in my parents' fucking cupboard beneath the stairs. I have no idea where it came from, where it went, but I read a poem and I wept. I was like 8 and I was so moved by this. And from that moment, I mean, and there was a recognition even that like something, crying isn't bad. Like I had this emotional experience that was layered and complex. And from that moment, I learned that if I engage with things that make me feel that way, it can lead me toward deeper emotional paths and healing. And poetry does that for me, and it's always done that for me.
Yeah, that. I think for me, poetry is a space that encourages vulnerability more than anything. My entire life, I've been accused of being overly emotional. It's not a wrong accusation, it's just not an appropriate one. But I think, in the hardest times of my life, the page has always been there. Other people's work has always been there. And that's been a massive comfort for me. It's the thing that I turn to where I don't know where to go. I don't write poems because I start them and know exactly what I want to say. I write the poems because I don't know what I want to say. And I find out what I want to say by writing the poem. And so it's fostered a lot of emotional healing for me that way.
That's kind of a perfect setup for the next question, but I'll back up a little bit. So you, dear audience, may or may not have noticed that I've tried, starting a few readings ago, to have kind of in the way that we advertise, like a blurb, right? Just a few sentences of what you can expect from these poets and what they're kind of thinking about that intersect, etc. I hope you notice, because man, I pore over every single word as a writer myself. Thank you, I guess. But the kind of working title, I've also become a big fan of the slash. Not close to Dana Levin's obsession with the M dash, but I'm getting there. But so my working title for this one was What We Don't Say, right? So we talked about the idea of withholding. So I think when we are processing our emotions, right, we're constantly kind of figuring out, what am I going to say that's going to land this way? What am I not going to say? And that's not dissimilar to crafting a poem. So anyway, in our conversation leading up to tonight, the idea of withholding came up. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how withholding works when you're either in the editing process or the initial kind of generative process, just how you think about that in terms of your craft.
Yeah. I think for me, this is something that comes fairly naturally, the withholding, if you will, because I think we've all maybe seen a poem in its early stages, right? Who somebody just poured their heart out on the page, and it's beautiful, but it's not there where it needs to be, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Poems take time. But there is something to giving a little bit of information and then providing other details and saying exactly what it is that you want to say in that poem. I think confessional poetry often toes that line, right, of providing a little bit of information, a little bit of a confession, but it's not the entire poem often. And so I think, I don't know, I sometimes have heard in workshops that my poems are withholding too much. And so it's hard sometimes to decipher where the line is or what context you need to provide for a reader to feel enthralled with it, if you will. But I think, I don't know, that's all stuff that develops over time. So sometimes there's poems that withhold a little more and sometimes there's poems that don't.
Yeah, and I know when I first introduced myself to you, one of the reasons I did is because I was so just impressed with your poem that you brought to Poetry in the Woods because it was so economical. It seemed like you had taken so much time to decide why each specific word was there. And I mean, you know, I'm sure there are whole poetry careers based on making those kinds of decisions, but like, I was really enviable about that. So, yeah, you can start there or start anywhere, but that's why this question is interesting to me.
Well, thank you. Dana, what's the quote? Stevens, it's like a good poem must resist intelligence almost successfully, or some shit like that.
The poem must resist the intelligence almost successfully.
The poem must resist the intelligence almost successfully. I mean, that's just something that kind of hit me. When I was younger writing poetry, I was urged to be more confessional than I wanted to be. I was urged to, like, you're half black, write all your poems about being half black. It's like, what the fuck? I don't fucking want to. Or like, you know, you've had this experience, write about abandonment. It's like, okay, I mean, you know, in a way I am, but I also found, I think a lot of it has to do with who I read and who I loved. You know, when I got to college, I read a shit ton of Central European poets who were writing in this strange, absurdist way, because if they wrote in a more poured out confessional sense, they would be put into jail when they were writing them. And so they found a way to kind of skirt it by being weird. And I loved that. I found that extraordinarily interesting. It made me want to learn how to do that with my own poems. In terms of revision, I suck at it. It's not that I don't do it. Usually revision for me is just cutting shit out. I do spend a lot of time on every single little word. And if it's not the right word, I will not put it there. And it takes me a long time. It can take me a really long time to write one poem. Especially the shorter ones really do take some time. But I think in a way it's like rebellion, honestly. I think I was rebelling at the idea that in order to be a successful poet, I had to be confessional and I had to take up a lot of space. I was like, fuck that. So I tried it different.
Awesome. I have one or two more questions I wanted to get to, but also wanted to throw it back to you and see if there's anything floating around in your brains that you wanted to throw onto us, either from the interwebs or from the real life in the flesh human beings here. Go for it.
I guess it's a question for both of you, but I already know Bailey's answer. You mentioned getting sober at 19. I got sober at 21, and I'm a musician. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the relationship your sobriety's had to your poetry and even just the difference before and after, or productivity, or creativity, etc.
Thank you for your question.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think anybody who gets sober young, it's just such a fresh wound to carry, and it's hard. Like there's no other way to say it eloquently or to sugarcoat it. It's just hard. But for me, when I was really trying to distract my brain from the impulse of like wanting to drink or use, it was like, go read a book, write a poem, just anything else. Wash the dishes was one I got a lot from people in 12-step programs, and stuff like that helped. Because it's just about grounding yourself in that moment to make sure that you survive into the next moment, you know? So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks.
Do you still want Bailey to answer even though you know the answer?
Yeah, she might have something new to say.
Probably not, but yeah, well, I first got sober when I was 20, maybe just turned 20. I am 30 now, and I did a lot of trying to figure out if I was actually an addict between 20 and 30. I am. So I did a lot of experimenting, and I found out that when I was when I'm drinking and using, I'm really not making art. And when I'm not, I am. I think for me, this is, yeah, you've heard this, but I didn't used to feel this way. I think it's getting older, but to me, art requires, for me, discipline, integrity, and sincerity, and I don't have any of those things if I'm fucked up.
Thanks, Bailey.
Thanks for asking. I got one more question, and then I'm going to ask us to gather some paradise. I'll talk about what that means. So I'll start with myself. When I was an undergrad, I think the best choice I made about my writing was to take a sculpture class, because it forced me to think about art in a very different way. And when I went back to writing, I just felt like such a more alive writer. I don't know a different way to say that. So I just signed up for a drawing class that I'm taking in April, May. Very excited about that. What art is your writing in conversation with, or in relation with, or would you think is a sibling form in some way?
Thank you. I think for me, it's not necessarily directly, but I think movies are a really big one for me. Movies in their own right do a lot of withholding. You know, there's not always all of the information that you would think would be there. It's implied. So I think that's a huge one for me, especially, you know, movies are often so narrative driven. I think the space that my poetry has fallen into, especially as of recent, is more narrative based. So
Good one. What about you?
Well, I would say, so painting, because I think I just get a similar feel from it, where like I see a fucking badass weird painting and I'm like, whoa, you know, and it kind of sends me. But honestly, the first thing that really comes to mind is like the art of human relationship, and practicing loving and figuring out how to do that. Like, it's not a thing that you just know how to do. You know, you have to practice it. You have to practice communicating. You have to practice pausing. You have to practice listening and biting your tongue. Not necessarily withholding in a bad way, but pacing and being present. And I really, really believe that relationships are a form of art, and that they can be, molded, not in the sense of manipulated, but molded, grown and changed into something beautiful over time.
Thank you. So I always like to begin closing the evening by asking our poets to talk about something fantastic they have hopefully maybe recently discovered that is artistic-ish. Maybe it's related to writing and poetry, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a movie that is informing your writing, or an act of loving that is informing a poem that is coming out of it. And I'm happy to start to give you all a little bit of time to kind of think. I have told several people this evening already that I finally got my copy, because I was, number 473 in line for Kaveh Akbar's new novel, Martyr. And it is really wonderful. I have to admit, I was a little skeptical. I love his poetry, but you never quite know if somebody could make the jump to a very different genre or not successfully, and he very much does. He's an incredibly strong storyteller who just sprinkles in these little, just fantastically poetic nuggets in the middle of his prose. So very much recommend Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. Get signed up now, and your copy will arrive in like June at your local library. So who wants to go next?
I am a Kaveh Akbar stan, so thank you for that. I adore him. I recently watched this movie called War Pony, which was produced, written, and directed by a woman named Riley Keough. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but and it's just a really beautiful kind of coming of age about two Lakota boys who live on a reservation and how their lives intersect over time as they're kind of approaching manhood. I won't give any more of it away than that, because you really need to go watch it. It's so good.
Love it. Billy.
This is fucked up and you're gonna hate it. Silence. When I'm going through it, I want to have shit on. Podcasts, TV, music, whatever it is, reading out loud, doing something, talking, whatever, calling. I've been practicing laying on my back in my bed for 30 minutes every night, silent. And sometimes it fucking blows. But a lot of the time, it's like totally fucking healing, and gives way for like just my thoughts, to come through, because they're not just being totally dampened. So I've been practicing some silence lately, and it's hard, but it's good. I love it.
Love it. 3 cheers for mindfulness, for sure. All right, we're going to be further closing by by me asking you to appreciate these poets, please. Our next poetry at the point, and it is we just have kept the bar high all spring. This one's going to be quite special as well. It's on Tuesday, April 23rd, and we have some flyers back there for you to pick up and take with you, in addition to checking this out on our social medias. But this will be a showcase of 3 poets, a couple of whom I believe are from out of town, traveling here for this, who are all on Perugia Press, a small independent press. So that'll kind of be our focus, and I will read you the finely crafted blurb. Despite massive changes in the publishing industry, the small press has remained critical as a home for poetry. Perugia Press poets Melody S.G., Carolina Hachandani, and Catherine Anderson will read their work and discuss the process of taking a poem, joining it with other poems, and seeing it all the way through to becoming a book. So definitely please check that out. It's going to be a little bit of an extended time, probably go about an hour and a half, just to give plenty of time for those poets to read their work and be in conversation with them. So please check that out. And then we're going to take a little bit of a summer break, and then we'll be back in August. What else did I want to say? Oh, those of you watching online or in the future after March 26th, we're so glad you're here. Please engage, please share, please comment, like, and subscribe, as the kids say. Thanks to the poets. Thanks to Aaron, Quick, and Eileen for running the show, being my wizards behind the curtain. Thank you to you for coming out and seeing the live poetry reading. Be safe, take care of each other. I'll see you next month.